Welcome, everybody, to the next episode of the Department Number 2 podcast. Darryl and I are joined tonight with Andrew Houghtaling. And Andrew is an expert on the 9th Ohio. And we are going to be getting into these guys. You know, who are they? What do they do? Why are they this kind of famous regiment, I would say? And so we're just going to learn more about these guys and take a deep dive into a very unique group of individuals.
Sounds good. We'll jump in here a little bit. First of all, huzzah, and welcome to another episode. So we've actually put together a string of them this year so far. So hopefully we'll keep that momentum going for y'all. There's no illnesses. There's no, snow stuff, whatever, right? Just whatever to keep us from doing this. I've known Andrew, 5, 6, 7 years now, I guess, ballpark. Somewhere in that ballpark. So we've quaffed a few beers together and discussed Civil War in the background. And so, of course, the 9th Ohio is kind of a pet regiment for me as well, not nearly as much as Andrew's, but, we're here locally, Cincinnati, part of the company came from my home county of Butler County, just north. And so I have great interest in the 9th Ohio as it stands. And so we're going to jump in. We got a couple questions off the group, but we're going to jump in with a couple that we came up with. First of all, Andrew, tell us a little bit about your own history in the Civil War and why specifically the 9th Ohio.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thanks for bringing me on. It's really just a joy to be able to come and talk about this. Originally, my family, it's the same old story. My family was all interested in history. My dad and brothers actually were also living historians since I was, just a little kid. Growing up, I was also interested in wargaming. And so one of sort of my formative experiences, say 11, 12 years old, was playing the Union side at Gettysburg and, getting defeated time and time again on the first day, playing the 11th Corps, which, as we all know, retreated during that battle on the first day. And so, I asked my dad, like, what's the deal with these guys? And his answer was, well, they're just a bunch of German immigrants. And so that kind of, that stuck with me. And so, moving on, I've always been sort of like a natural learning languages. And so in high school, I took Latin and Greek. In college, I took French and German was the one that really stuck. And so when I finally got to the sort of the end of my degree, I had to decide on what to write my senior paper on. And I do have to give a call out to Dr. Carl Obrath, who has since passed away, and Don Toltzman, who Dr. Obrath turned me on to Don Toltzman, who was at the time the head of the German American Studies at UC, University of Cincinnati here in Cincinnati. And Toltzman told me about the 9th Ohio and other German regiments that came from Cincinnati. And so, from there, I did some research and I wrote my senior paper on it. And I've been studying the regiment for, last almost 25 years. So that's specifically why I got into that regiment. But of course, it's definitely bled into others.
Mm-hmm. Just as a pitch, Dr. Toltzman has a book that basically it's Gustav Taffel's book. You'll probably touch on that a little bit later, but Cincinnati Germans or German Cincinnatians, Cincinnati Germans in the Civil War. Fantastic book published locally by Little Miami Publishing or Press. It's a great book because it does cover all those German elements that are coming out of Cincinnati. There are quite a few. So a little pitch there. We still don't have a sponsor, so maybe that's
there you go.
Miami, maybe a little Miami.
We'll take book sponsors. Yeah, we'll give a shout out to the book.
We will definitely take book sponsors, no doubt about that.
Well, most I guess. But, yeah.
Well, good point. We'll talk about that on another podcast. So anyway, so let's back to our guests because this is what we do. So give us a little bit a rundown about the history of Die Neuner and give us a little bit about its national makeup.
So, well, what do you want to hear about first? Do you want to talk about the organization, or do you want to talk about the national makeup? Because that's a sort of a dicey discussion there.
Well, let's do the national first, so we can get Dan Masters out of our hair. So.
Right. So when I hear the question, how German was the 9th Ohio, or anything along the lines, what was the national makeup? It sort of highlights some common misunderstandings that I also get when I talk about German regiments, such as the 9th Ohio, but also, say, for example, the 24th Illinois, which I'll talk about here in a few minutes. And that's the difference between ethnicity and nationality. And so, for example, August Willich, who we're going to talk about here in a little bit, he was born in modern-day Poland, but he definitely was not an ethnic Pole, right?
Right.
And so when we talk about quote-unquote ethnic Germans, that can mean really anyone from parts of France, Alsace and Lorraine, northern Italy to parts of Eastern Europe. So It's a really large geographic area, and dare I say, at this time period at least, that could encompass to some extent places in the United States. And so we as Americans, what we often miss is that within that category, you've got dozens of regional variations. And so, somebody from East Prussia, like Willich, and somebody from, say, Westphalia are going to have a completely different life experience. They're going to have a completely different cuisine or food that they experience with, have life experience with. They're a lot of times going to have different denominations of religion. And so, those two areas, Westphalia and East Prussia, they're separated by 500 or so miles, but they're still Prussia. And so, what we need to understand is back then there were about 40 or so kingdoms, duchies, states, etc. And so if you understand sort of like the geography of Germany and people, I know, Darryl, you've studied World War II a lot, so you may sort of identify with this. You can quickly realize that, you don't even need to go 50 miles, let alone 500 to encounter, a community with a completely different worldview than another. So, when we're asking this question, how German was the 9th Ohio, we can certainly look at it from a genealogical perspective. And so I can tell you that, there were about 50 or so that were not born in a European state. There was actually one guy that was born on the Atlantic Ocean. But I would say of those, probably 90% of them came from a community that had a, predominant German community within it, or, were otherwise, say second generation German Americans. And so, the way that we address that, we really need to start looking at company organization, and we really need to start looking at the descriptive books of these individual regiments, where we can see these actual birthplaces. And a lot of them, they just say, it'll in the descriptive book, it'll say town or city and then state. And so a lot of them will be blank and then just say Germany.
Yeah.
And that's not super helpful, but some of them took, great pains to write the actual city or town that they were from in the state. And so when we map these out, and I've done this for the 9th, for about 75 to 80% of the regiment, I've been able to find the birthplace of. And all you're really going to be able to get from that is, sort of trends. It's very helpful from genealogical perspective, from a question of, how German this was. Really, you need to start thinking of how did this regiment express its ethnicity. And so, we don't really have that in the United States to compare to. But for example, the 9th Ohio, they had a very high percentage of people who were born in Southwest Germany, which was, like Baden, for example, was decidedly more liberal than many of the other German states. And then perhaps not coincidentally, August Willich's, one of his campaigns took place in that Southwest German corridor, and there's a huge percentage from there. And then the same thing with Northwest Germany. What Dan Wellert, who is the author of the book on Cincinnati Turners, as well as the book on the Cincinnati delicacy Geta.
Yes.
So what we have sort of adopted as what we call the Geta-lelogram, which is a parallelogram that stretches in northern Germany between Osnabrück and 4 other towns that I don't remember off the top of my head. There's a huge concentration of 9th Ohio members from there. And so I think that sort of reflects the chain migration that happened with Cincinnati. There's a huge number also of Northwest Germans from that area in Cincinnati. And we see that reflected in Geta, which is still popular today.
It is. So it's the new name of the regiment. It's the Geta Regiment.
There you go.
That's the title of your modern history of the 9th. I just see it coming now.
There you go.
I see it. I love it.
So, and I just wanted to add, so you can see a similar thing with the 24th Illinois. I did research on this regiment for the 160th of Perryville. There was a group that wanted to portray them. And the regiment is commonly misrepresented as with as much as a company of Hungarians or Bohemians or Austrians. It depends on who you talk to. But when you look at the actual birthplaces from the descriptive book, actually, I mean, the 24th Illinois was more German than the 9th Ohio. There was only about 2 to 3% that were from Austria, Bohemia, and Hungary, that sort of thing. So it really helps to look at those. I mean, they're official records, right? Each regiment was issued one of these descriptive books. And so it's very helpful to suss out the real behind the scenes ethnicity of the regiment. So in conclusion, all of that to say that it's much more important, at least as far as I'm concerned, to look at the ethnicity of the regiment through how they express that. And that's one of the things that I wrote about. Actually, that's the main focus of my MA paper, is that, they went to great lengths to some extent to express their German identity, or what they called their Deutschtum, in, say, music, in the religion, in the Turner Society, which we can talk about, and even in the food, which when they weren't subsisting on crackers and pork, they were able to get beer and all sorts of other sausages and all sorts of other German delicacies. So, that's a long answer for how German the regiment was, but I think
it's a good answer.
Points it out.
Well, you jumped in. You mentioned Turner, which kind of now turns into the other part of our question, right? Or the other question is the organization, right? So let's talk a little bit about the organization of the Ninth and its makeup and what's going on really in the 5 to 10 years before the outbreak of the Civil War when it relates to the Ninth.
Sure, absolutely. So the Turner movement, just very briefly, and I feel bad because this always gets sort of short shrift, right? But the Turner movement was originally founded as a response to Napoleon's that whole war, all of the Napoleonic Wars, and it was sort of an attempt to get the German youth, as we would say nowadays, off their butts, out into nature, and get them ready for the inevitable next time that the French came across the border.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1848, a guy by the name of Gustav Tafel and several others got together, and they were at that time already planning on creating a American Turner Society to sort of mirror the Turner Societies over in Europe. And so Tafel in I think it's 1853 actually makes a speech where he sort of outlines the whole reason why the Turner Societies were created in the United States. And it's just that it's that he says that the Americans are no longer the backwoodsmen who defeated the British, and all of the, it's funny, sort of seeing the reflection of a guy cursing modern society, because he talks about, now with all the horse-drawn carriages, we can say the same thing about cars or the internet or whatever. But he gives this, rousing speech basically saying, the Turners, it's not just wearing silly white uniforms and doing flips and stuff. It's getting back to nature. It's getting off your butt and getting out there and doing stuff. And so they would meet in, they would meet together in the city, and they would go out on these, what they called Turnfahrt, and they would go spend, the night or the weekend out in the forest, and they would do gymnastics and other sort of calisthenics and that sort of thing. And then they come back, but they were not inconspicuous with these sorts of things. And the Turners also, so they started to experience, nativism. So there were some people in the communities that didn't care for, these outsiders, these foreigners, and their weird way of doing things. One of the things that they really disagreed with was that they drank beer on Sunday. And for Germans, the Continental Sunday, that was just a common thing. They may go to church or whatever, and then the afternoon was a time of hanging out with family and friends and everything. But especially the white uniforms, the outwardness of the Turner Society, I think drew the attention of those that, didn't really care for the outsiders. And so the Turners, they also armed themselves, and they also formed groups to, sort of escort one another from one place to another. So in 1855, there was a local election. It was a mayoral election here in Cincinnati. And long story short, there was a huge riot where the nativists and the know-nothings came into Over the Rhine, which was the heavily German and other immigrant district in Cincinnati, and they destroyed ballot boxes and they tried to overturn the election. And so the next day, what the Turners did was, along with the rest of the German Americans and other immigrants that were living in Over the Rhine, they mustered together a defense where they barricaded off streets, and they met the Know-Nothings at the canal that went through the middle of Cincinnati. I think it was from the canal to the base of the hill on Vine Street. So I think it was 8 or 10 blocks was supposedly just full of a mass of humans. And so as a result of this riot, the Turners sort of established a network of telegraph communication, and they even had a system of rocket communication worked out with the Irish groups in the city to make sure that this sort of thing didn't happen again. And so when Fort Sumter happened, 7 states had already seceded, right? So it was not a surprise, and the 9th Ohio was able to use these networks along with the promotion of some of the pillars of the German American community here in Cincinnati to basically fill the rosters within 24 hours of when they made the call.
Yeah, there's numbers of these men, and you've got it. Andrew was nice enough to kind of give us an outline of what he was going to talk about tonight. And one of the facts that you posted out there was something like 600 men were turned away because they couldn't fill, or those ranks were already filled, I guess I should say.
Yeah. There are differing accounts. Some say 200, some say 600, but I think really the point here is that they had their pick of the litter, the cream of the crop, or whatever you want to use, and they were able to have these physical examinations. I think the quote said that when the examining physician thumped on the chest of the Turners, it sounded as so many anvils. And and one of the things that I was able to determine by looking at the rosters, say between the 9th Ohio, which was the first German regiment from Cincinnati, and the 28th Ohio, which was the second, and they were raised, not simultaneously, but within a month or two of one another. The 9th Ohio, on average, is about 5 years younger than a member of the 28th Ohio. And so I really think this physical examination was really as strict as they said it was. And sort of cut out a lot of the people who they felt wouldn't be able to make it on campaign.
One of the things, too, that's unique with the 9th and other German regiments is company organization. We don't have companies A, B, C. We have a numeric designation. And I think you touched on that a little bit, too, in the notes. So give us a little bit of a breakdown of the companies a little bit, and then also just some of the guys that are organizing, right? Some of these leaders that are coming to the fore.
Yeah. So as far as I'm able to understand from, the regimental history and other sources, you basically had 2 forces that were recruiting for this regiment that came together. And so the regiment, the first 4 companies of the regiment were built mainly from Turners from Cincinnati, as well as across the river from Covington and Newport. And then they had about, I think it was 60 some march all the way down from Hamilton, which is in Butler County. And then they even had some Turners come down the river, or up the river from Louisville. So those first 4 companies, they formed into one battalion, and the other 4 the next 4 companies, were recruited from mainly working men's organizations from a guy named August Willig, who I'll talk about here in a second. At that point they had 8 companies, and they then realized that in order to get accepted into U.S. service, they would have to have 10 companies. And so the final 2 were filled out by pre-war German militia. And what I think happened was they wanted to keep that sort of separation. And so companies 1 through 4 were the Turners, and 6 through 9 were the sort of Willig's guys. And then they put company 5 and company 10 on the end. And then they operated in 2 battalions generally, although, as we know about Civil War tactics and everything, a lot of times you just end up operating as a regiment. So that sort of goes by the wayside. So the Turners, they had this meeting on, I think it was April 17th at the Turner Hall, to recruit people for the regiment. And sort of the what I would call the German social pillar, Cincinnati German social pillar. This guy named Gustav Tafel, mentioned him before. He was one of the co-founders of the Turners. He was also a lawyer, and he was a very important person. The founding was sanctioned by Friedrich Hecker, one of the sort of heroes of the revolutions. And several of those co-founders also became Niners. And so he sort of, I think, galvanized the Turner element into those first four companies. And then the second battalion, or the other 4 companies, were raised by a guy named August Willig. Now, I'm not going to go super in depth on him, because I think you guys should have David Dixon on to talk about him. David Dixon has written the biography of August Willig, and can tell you more about him than and your listeners more about him than I ever could. But it's important to understand that he was very involved in the labor movement, both pre and post war. He was a very, we'll say, very, very left-leaning individual. He was also very charismatic. And he was also the editor of a newspaper. And so he had a pretty good reach. So when it came time to vote for the colonel of the regiment, he was up for it. But there was another guy that, I mentioned the Turner meeting, and at first they thought this guy August Moore, who ended up becoming the colonel of the 28th Ohio and a brigadier or I don't know if he ever got brigadier general, but I know he commanded a brigade.
Yes, I think he got it.
Everybody thought that August Moore, who was a veteran of the Mexican War, was the obvious choice. But he kind of demurred and was like, I don't think this is going to happen. And so Gustav Tafel put forth the name of a guy, Robert McCook, which that is not obviously a German regiment, or right. it's obviously not a German name, but like, so it may have come as a little bit of a surprise, but it was sort of an obvious choice. So the relations are, very web-like in Cincinnati German politics. But so Gustav Tafel was a lawyer, and someone with whom he had a lot of interaction was a guy named John Stallo, or Johann Stallo, who was also a German American. And his law partner was Robert Latimer McCook. And so he had to have had dealings with the German community. He was a known quantity. And more importantly, he was a member of the quote unquote Fighting McCooks, which was a famous family that I think they had 15 members of their family.
17 altogether.
17.
There's another tribe that everybody forgets about, and
right.
That particular father had 3 sons that served as physicians in various capacicies. So 17.
Well, there you go. Yeah,
17 first cousins.
And so, even among those, there's a really impressive amount of brass when you look at it. And so, Robert McCook had connections, and I think probably one of the main connections is his brother was Edwin Stanton's best man. Edwin Stanton ended up becoming the Secretary of War. And his younger brother, just to show the strength of that bond, so to speak, his younger brother was actually named Edwin Stanton McCook. He had a reputation for being a little hot-headed. So I think they felt that McCook suited them very well. They knew him. They knew he'd fight for him, and they knew he'd have connections, and that's who they decided on.
Yeah. Made sure that lager was delivered, correct?
Yeah, for sure.
You touched on, I always say August Willich. You touched on him a little bit. And yes, for those of you who do not have David Dixon's book, it is fantastic. It will give you a lot of insight to a guy who said Karl Marx wasn't radical enough or something like that. I'm paraphrasing, and that'd be more aquapical than anything else. But Karl Marx was not radical enough. So very interesting. But Willich is a cool character. I again, this extension of German, right? So the 32nd Indiana, which had a contingency of Cincinnatians, and Willich will take over as colonel of the 32nd Indiana. I follow them a lot, particularly in places like Rowlett Station and whatnot. And so, just that natural progression for Mr. Willich. But he is an interesting character, and the bio is worth it just from, you may not care about Civil War, but just from a biography type perspective. You want to introduce yourself to an interesting person. Willich is one of those guys. My father-in-law even read it. Like he doesn't read much Civil War, but he likes history. And I'm like, well, let me borrow this book here and give that a read. So pretty radical.
No one can borrow my copy. It's all marked up with notes and everything.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that.
No, not at all.
All right. There's one guy on your list you haven't mentioned yet, personality wise. And he's leading the regiment at Mill Springs. I don't want to jump to Mill Springs quite yet, but let's talk about Gustav.
Sure. So Gustav Kemmerling, as opposed to Gustav Tafel, it's there are a lot of Gustavs in in the 9th Ohio. Let me tell you. So he was a captain while the regiment was in West Virginia, and there was a lot early on. There was a lot of conflict between the company officers, the regimental staff, and specifically Robert McCook. So much so that he submitted his resignation while they were in West Virginia. My understanding, or I guess my take on it is, after Willich left, There were several appointments that were open that had not gotten full or filled, and McCook was just overworked and overwhelmed, and he was just done. And so when it came that point, one of the sort of the stipulations McCook made to withdrawing his resignation was that Gustav Kemmerling become the major and take over where Willig was. So I think that sort of speaks to the confidence that McCook had in him, and then he was confirmed, or so at the very least supported by the rest of the regiment. So it was sort of a good move to ameliorate the situation. He was said to have known the Prussian drill like the back of his hand, so there was basically no drop off from when Willig left to when he took over. And so he took command of the regiment when McCook was promoted to brigadier, when he was promoted to command the brigade, which happened in the West Virginia campaign. And he served as the regimental commander throughout the rest of their service.
All right, let's talk about that. I mean, that's kind of a nice lead up. Well, maybe without getting too deep into each individual action, but maybe touch on the various places that the 9th will be engaged. And then we could probably, as you're running through that, maybe even give us some insight of what you think is the best performance of the 9th.
Sure. Well, so they leave from Camp Dennison and they're on the West Virginia campaign until about the end of November 1861, when they're recalled to Cincinnati. In West Virginia, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to plug my book, which I'll bring up here just a little bit later. But there are some really good accounts by the guy who wrote his autobiography, Frederick Finup, of their time in West Virginia. And it's a lot of marching. It's a lot of skirmishing. It's a lot of, not having enough supplies. They were at the Battle of Rich Mountain, but they were not, they weren't engaged, so to speak. They came under fire, but they weren't engaged. And they were at the Battle of Carnifex Ferry, which was, really their first real taste of battle. They got an order to charge the entrenchments of the Confederates, and were recalled almost immediately after. And so 3 companies were separated from the regiment, but they were able to use actually the bugle calls from the Prussian drill to reform, despite the rough terrain and everything. So after they leave the West Virginia theater, they stop over in Cincinnati for 2 to 8 days, depending on who you are and whether or not you follow the rules. They end up over around Louisville. And from there, they embark on the Mill Springs campaign. Their bayonet charge at Mill Springs, you guys talked about it in an episode a couple weeks ago, and it's definitely a thing I'm sure it was a thing to behold. I will say, in response to Andrew Miller's talk about I think he made a very good point, bringing up the fact that the Confederates, yes, marched all night through mud and had poor weapons and everything, but also the Union troops had also marched forever leading up into the battle,
right.
And so it's Mill Springs. Yeah, the Ninth Ohio's charge is sort of the stuff of legend, but at the same time, it's more of like a coup de grace, right? Like the battle at that point was already not looking good, and so from there they miss Shiloh, and they're involved in the siege of Corinth, but not the battle. After that, they are sent with part of George Thomas's army along east, along North Alabama, and that at that point they stop in Florence and Tuscumbia, that area, and at that point Robert McCook falls ill. There is some dispute whether he falls ill just of natural causes. Frederick Finnup, you can read this in the book, plug. He seems to think that there was more nefarious actions taking place. I'm not weighing in one way or the other on that, but so McCook was ill for about 2 weeks, and when the Ninth Ohio leaves Tuscumbia and heads east, at one point the brigade gets separated. McCook, Vanderveer, is commanding the brigade at that point. The McCook says something to the effect of, if he's gonna tramp my boys around all day, I'll show them what's what, or something along those lines. And so he goes along the correct route. There's a lot of he gets separated from the rest of the brigade. There's a lot of sort of after the fact thought that it was a trap, that they had led him to get separated. The Confederate guerrillas had led him to get separated from his command. And so he ends up separated from the rest of the brigade by about 2 miles, and they get stopped. Words are exchanged, bullets are exchanged, and McCook ends up getting killed. I have I don't know if you guys provide links, in your comments, but I have a video that I did about this, that goes into quite some more depth. But the long and the short of it is McCook is killed. The Ninth Ohio and the Second Minnesota as well take it out on the surrounding countryside, and depending on which account you read or believe, houses were burned within a 2 to 10 mile radius. So that was a sort of a huge event in the history of the Ninth Ohio, to the extent that they put that date after they reincorporated after the war. They put that date on their calendar along with Mill Springs and Chickamauga as a yearly memorial. After that, there's a huge race up to Perryville. They're not engaged really at Perryville. They come in at the last minute, and then it gets too dark. They spend a long time digging out the tunnel, the south tunnel above or north of Nashville from John Hunt Morgan.
Never heard of him. Have I ever mentioned that? Have I ever mentioned the guy's a little overrated? I don't know.
By this point, come on, serious.
I don't think we've ever said that before.
It's overrated. We've never had a comment about him being overrated. No. Yeah. Stop. Yeah. I'm not drinking with you now.
From there, they're involved in the Tullahoma campaign. Again, there's some really interesting tidbits that Frederick Finup provides in his autobiography. And then, heading into the Chickamauga campaign, and, we talked about this a little bit before we went on air or whatever. This is really where I think the 9th Ohio, as far as their battle performance, really shines. They, in the Battle of Chickamauga on September 19th, they're assigned to guard the division wagon train for ammunition, which does not sit well with Gustav Kemmerling. There's some disputes over whether he did this without orders or whether he was ordered to do so, but at some point early in the morning, or late in the morning, actually, on September 19th, he leaves the wagon train with leads the regiment from the wagon train on the double quick to where the rest of his brigade is defending, and they take up a spot on the right flank. And very shortly after that, there's a very good description about this by Finup. They send out their skirmishers and realize, oh crap, the Confederates are coming faster than we thought and in more numbers than we thought, and our skirmishers are getting overrun. And so at that point, they decide to lay down in the bush and have the left wing or left battalion fire a volley, and then the right wing or right battalion fire a volley as soon as the lines got in range, and then they execute this bayonet charge, which I went about a year and a half ago. I went out and walked from where their position was to where the marker is, where they ended their bayonet charge, and they recaptured this battery. It was the 5th U.S. Battery H. And I mean, it's maybe 3/4 of a mile, maybe not quite that far, but it's through really rough, really rough woods. There's some depressions in there. And so, this was a sort of a really phenomenal thing to do. Unfortunately, they got too far out and had to get called back. So they defend on the line with the rest of their brigade and are later pulled off. And on the next day, on September 20th, they sit out much of the battle. But then in the afternoon, they fight at Kelly's Field. They perform, essentially another charge there. They were flanked and had to reform and perform the charge like on the fly. And then from there, as the battle progressed, they ended up on Snodgrass Hill, with some of the other regiments as a last stand. Again, there's a lot of confusion about not just that battle, but in particular that last stand. And so, really what you can get is, a few accounts here and there, but I'm not really one to say, the 9th Ohio went and stood here and did this. So that's, maybe Dave Powell can give you.
We'll do another shameless plug if you've not picked up Dave's either Maps of Chickamauga. So if you just want to do one book on Chickamauga,
yep,
that'll actually make the battle much more clear, right? It'll add clarity. Just get the Maps of Chickamauga book. It is fantastic. A map on the right page with the corresponding text on the left page. And I don't know, I'll get the number wrong. 150 maps maybe in there, maybe more, something along those lines. And it starts with Tullahoma and runs all the way through the end of the Battle of Chickamauga. So it is fantastic. Of course, if you want deep dive, you would buy his 3-volume work on Chickamauga if you're looking at that deep dive tactical type of approach. But the thing I like about Dave's book is, and he and I've had conversations about it, I think he weaves the campaign, the higher level decision making very well with the tactical. And I think that's a great approach that he has. So anyway, yes, there's that shameless plug at that particular point.
I'll add in one more shameless plug. Well, it's not. Yeah. I'm not shameless about it, but if you know nothing about Chickamauga, I think starting off with Lee White's book on Chickamauga, that's a good place to start.
Yeah, it's a great place to start because Lee doesn't just focus, and he even says this in his book, and that's an emerging Civil War series. Mm-hmm. He mentions in his book that basically the tour is set up to follow the second day, the driving tour as it is, and so Lee does a decent job there of addressing some of the things that are happening on the first day. So that's a great intro book. Fantastic intro book. And if you're looking for one simpler title like that, I don't mean simple in a derogatory manner either. I mean, like just one book you just want to grab on Chickamauga because you don't want to do a deeper dive, then you could do worse than buy at least. That's for sure. So, wow, we're doing all kinds of plugs tonight. This is awesome. If we only had a sponsor. So.
Oh, man. I'll take a few bucks on my extra on my royalty check. I mean, I'd be okay with that. Yeah.
Royalty checks. What are those? Those are awesome. All right. So obviously it sounds like from what you're saying and what you've kind of laid out is Chickamauga is their high point.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, in their experience, in the run of those 2 days, they went into the battle with just over 500. And they left with, I think, just over 250. And so they suffered about 50% casualties. They, fought in, 3 completely different parts of the battlefield. And, I think one thing that that gets overlooked on the first day, when they advanced from the train, they dropped their knapsacks. And they never made it back to them. And so they lost, I mean, just imagine, 500, this is everything I own in the world.
All those letters.
Yeah, all those letters, photographs, all of that stuff is gone.
Yep.
And so, and a more, I guess, pressing immediate need, blankets, rubber blankets, all of that stuff, changes of clothes, socks, you're missing all that. And it got pretty chilly, that second night of Chickamauga. So
it did,
they're spending the night out there in the cold, having lost half your buddies is, it's a rough. So, moving on from there, Missionary Ridge, they, by that point, they added, I think it was 2 more regiments to the brigade. And so at this point, the brigade had like 8 or 7 regiments in it or something like that. And they were in sort of the second wave behind the 2nd Minnesota skirmishers, in the first line, when they went up the slope at Missionary Ridge. But they were able to capture, I forget the number of guns that they claimed, to be able to capture. But, really the time after Missionary Ridge, I would say, is probably the most that I look at that time with the regiment and I just say, wow, how did they even do it? Because, not only are you talking about spending December, January, and February, in entrenchments with, spotty supply, but you're also, at this point, this is when they decide to make the national cemetery down there. And so the 9th Ohio did a lot, their whole brigade did a lot of work clearing woods and stumps and all of that for that project. And so that's how they spent their time, from Missionary Ridge to the spring. And then they were sort of lucky in how things turned out time-wise. The Atlanta campaign starts, and their time is up right after the Battle of Resaca. And so George Thomas comes up and actually relieves them in person. They get sent back to Chattanooga, and the rest is history. They head back home.
They don't veteranize, right?
For the most part, no.
Yeah. There are guys that'll serve in other regiments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I came across a guy. It's in the 183rd, I think, Ohio, at Franklin. So he'd served in the 3 year of the 9th, and he wasn't done, and comes back and joins again and fights at the bloody Battle of Franklin. So these guys don't stop serving individually, but as a mass, they certainly do.
Yeah, I think. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask, was there a reason that they didn't veteranize like so many other regiments did?
I think in their book, in the regimental history, they basically chalk it up to we thought we had done our duty, and they were offered the chance to veteranize same time as the 2nd Minnesota, which accepted it and got 30 days furlough. But they said no thanks. And like Darryl said, there were several that went on. 183rd was a mostly German late war regiment. There were some that went in the 165th, I think it was. And so some of those late war regiments they enlisted in them, but for the most part, they did not veteranize.
Yeah. Some of them did join some of those 100 days regiments during the summer of 64, and did another 3 or 4 months at that particular point. And then again, the one gentleman I can distinctly remember from serving the 183rd, but they consider, if you read that regimental history, it's been a number of years, so I'll probably paraphrase this incorrectly, but it feels like they felt like they had won the war because they seem like to be the only regiment that ever fights. And I'm being just totally silly here, of course, but there's also some concerns on the home front. I think that's part of it too. I mean, they've left businesses, successful businesses. There's also an election that's going to be coming up in that fall, and I think they want to make sure that their neighborhood over the Rhine is going to still support the Union. That's some of that. I get some of that from some of the men as well.
Well, I know for sure, maybe not necessarily over the Rhine, but they were very concerned about the Copperhead movement in Ohio, writ large. And, there was also this sort of mentality of, we got a lot of people back home that are saying they should do this and they should do this and they should do this, but we've been out here for going on 3 years doing this and that. Why don't you guys give it a try for a little while?
Yeah. Fascinating stuff, obviously, from the 9th Ohio. I'm sure we could probably go on for about 4 more hours.
Right.
But
I know
we want to make sure that we get through a couple more questions for you. So let's go back to the book. Let's talk a little bit more about the book, and just kind of, we'll make this the pimping hour, I guess.
There we go. So the book is titled "The Story of My Life." Very simple. It's by a guy named Frederick Finup. He served in 5th Company or Company E of the 9th Ohio. Quickly about him, he after the war, he moved out to Kansas and, basically was one of the, if not town founders, one of the movers and shakers of Garden City, Kansas. And, through the years, his legacy grew, and his son and his grandson grew his business, and now the FinUp Foundation has holdings in various different areas. And my wife and I went out to Garden City this 2 summers ago, and they have a park named after the family, and it's got it's got a water park, it's got a zoo, it's a huge expanse, and so he was a really huge name in that community. And I stumbled across that book several years ago and wrote to the foundation because it was written in English. It was very choppy. There was, basically no punctuation, no paragraphs, because it was Frederick's second language, and he didn't really receive that much of an education. And so, I eventually, after talking to them, I said, I can sort of edit this and annotate it and make it readable for everybody, because it's a really great story. So Frederick FinUp, he was a private. He served all 3 years. He was never wounded. He was never sick. He never spent any time in the hospital. He has amazing accounts of not just battles, but just mundane things that happen in camp that make you go, ha, it's also a treasure trove of info on pre-war Cincinnati, as well as the post-war West, and just sort of a primer on how full this story is. My 2 favorite stories from the book, they come from pre-war and post-war. It's of the first payday when he was the ripe old age of 10 years old. And then after the war, he takes a trip out to Garden City, and they have to pass through Dodge City, Kansas, which my wife and I stopped in as well. And he's got some interesting things to say about that as well. And so, those are my 2 favorite stories, and I'm a Civil War historian, so that should tell you how interesting the rest of the stuff in the book is. It really is a true sort of rags to riches story, because his family, when they arrived, they had all of their stuff stolen. So they really only had the clothes on their backs and I think like 45 cents to their name. And now, he's got the FinUp Foundation in Garden City, and he's got a park named after him.
Yeah. And so I don't know if you remember, but about, I guess, a little over a year ago, you sent me some of it to read through.
Yeah.
And I never got to finish it. That's when the whole family started getting COVID. It's like boom, boom, boom.
Oh.
Yeah, but I do remember reading that part, where all their stuff gets stolen, and it's sad.
Yeah.
What happened to a lot of the people around him. And I think that's a perfect way to describe it. It's rags to riches. And I mean, you talk about rags, that was rough situation. I don't do that at all.
Well, and the cool thing is too, if you're in or around Cincinnati, you can walk the same route that he would have taken from his where he lived in Over the Rhine, or then on Jackson Hill, all the way down to where he worked on 2nd Street. And it's like an hour, and it'd probably take you an hour and a half to walk. And he did that every day. So it's just a really fascinating look at what life was really like back then.
Yeah.
Or it's available on Amazon. Softback book, $19.95, I do believe, is the price on that. So if you're looking for more information on a member of the Ninth, or just a perspective of a German, I think that's probably a wise thing to do, is to look into that. I have it. I've read it. I love it. So it's funny. A couple times I've chuckled out loud. So it's kind of, I mean, that's, if you can chuckle out loud when you're reading something from 150 years ago, that's pretty good. So pretty good. Okay. One last topic that we definitely want to touch on is this invention of yours. I'll use it that way. This creation of yours. and it's the Ninth Ohio, A Living History. I think I have the title correct. Yeah. Tell us about what this is.
Well, it all really stemmed out of the idea that, I can write a book. Anybody can write a book if they put their mind to it and, follow the conventions, right? But I'm much more interested in who these people were than what they wore or where they fought. That's not to say that stuff is not important, but it's to me the person that put on the uniform and did the things is more important than the uniform and the things, right? And so, going back to what I talked about with culture, that goes into food, it goes into music, and, a lot of different things. And if I write about it in a book, that's great. But eventually what's going to happen is someone's going to read that and they're going to go, oh, that's neat. And then they're going to put the book down. And, how much are people going to absorb just reading about a song that they sang, where if you can actually put the words to music and sing the song and translate it and give some sort of context why they were singing this song. And so for an example that I'll use is one that David Dixon gives in his talk about August Willich. Prior to the Battle of Shiloh, the 32nd Indiana, they were playing or singing the Marseillaise. Now, that was popular all over, but there were a lot of different versions, and one of the versions that came to the fore during the revolutions was one that it was called Reveille or Reveille, and it talks about this is the new revolution. This isn't the old one, the old French Revolution that didn't accomplish anything. This is the new one that is going to break the chains and, restore freedom to the people. And so, they weren't singing the French national anthem going into battle. They were singing their anthem. So looking at those sorts of things, another example is from the 50th anniversary of the 9th Ohio, their reunion. They rewrote the song Die Wacht am Rhein with words that talk about how this is their second adopted fatherland, and they were just poor immigrants across the sea when the United States reached out its hand helpfully, and so they were very aware of their Deutschtum, their Germanness, and that's the thing that really fascinates me. And so 9th Ohio Living History is an opportunity for me to get face-to-face with people. My son and I play fife and drum. We play, we play German songs. We don't play Yankee Doodle and Girl awesome. I Left Behind Me and all of that. These are all researched songs that either they would have known, should have known, or documented to have played. And the same thing with food. Just real quickly, I want to plug, if there's any restaurants out there that can do German cuisine, one of the things I've done 3 talks now where it's been sort of like a mock progressive dinner, right? Where you talk about something and then you bring out the first course and then you talk about something else. And, you can do that with a German regiment, and it's a full 5-course meal that, would they have eaten this in camp? Yeah, probably not. But over the course of 3 years of service, every single one of those things on the menu, they would have had at some point or another. So
gladly attend that.
Right. And that's one of the more interesting things to me is food, right? That's an expression of our culture. If we, you're from Cincinnati, or Cincinnati area, Derrick.
Yep.
Like, so, Skyline or Cincinnati style chili, geta, all that stuff is an expression of our culture, whether you like it or not.
Yeah. Yep. You never take out of towners to Skyline. You just don't do it. Because
I was an out of towner though.
Yeah. Well, you get used to it, I think, if you try it. But if you get it out of your head that it's not really chili.
Yeah.
That it's noodles with cheese and some stuff on it, then you go, oh, okay. Because, I'm thinking chili, I'm thinking chili, right?
Yeah.
Like Texas chili, right?
Chunks of meat and beans.
Right.
And
that's right. Yeah. Not this Middle Eastern Greek thing that we have kind of going, Lebanese Greek thing going that we have. And if you grow up here, you love it. I mean, that's just the way it kind of goes for the most part.
Yeah. So that tells you right there, what role food plays in regional culture. I mean, we have regional barbecue wars here in the United States, completely different,
Yeah. But to your point, you made comment earlier, 50 miles difference, right? Like, I think Skyline's finally getting expanded, but 50 miles away, you won't necessarily find Cincinnati chili, and people go, what? Right? And it's 50 miles. It's an hour drive, right? So and
that's in 2025.
That's right.
Probably 50 years ago, there were a lot of communities in Ohio that had never heard of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
With that, any closing thoughts, Andrew?
Really, sort of to close on the 9th Ohio Living History. Originally, the intent was to, get the German culture out there, but to also sort of signal to other historians, both living historians and regular historians, that the 9th, like it's a living history. It's a living history. Like the 9th Ohio was not the only German regiment, and I would love nothing more than for there to be a 26th Wisconsin, a living history, an 8th New York, a living history, because a lot of times within the reenacting community or the living history community, you get this sense of like, I want to do this impression so I can put the feather in my hat and be done with it. And the depth that really needs to be gone into in order to do these guys justice, that you can't do that. You can't just show up and be, I'm the 9th Ohio for today, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's what I'm really hoping for, over here, is that there are some groups that say, you know what, we really want to put our effort into this. Kind of on that note, I'm working with groups over in Germany who do both American Civil War reenacting and 1848-49 reenacting or living history for the revolutions. And so, that's just something that I think we would be well served to expand and look more into in an in-depth way.
Yeah. Good point. I think the things that we forget about being Civil War historians, maybe not this bunch, but this is 3 or 4 years of their entire life. It's the salient, probably point, maybe one of several salient points that they had coming to the United States was probably a big one. But it's a small snapshot, right? So, we keep forgetting that these people are just that. They're people who live full lives and have generations and those sorts of things. So I think that's what we need to look a little deeper when we're studying Civil War. It's not just what regiment moved where, which is totally fascinating for me because I love the tactics. But I also love that first person, like what is going on. You know, when we come across first person accounts, they're so important to us. Derrick, final words.
I just love the fascinating conversation again. I mean, it is so cool to learn about just these individual guys and this the culture they had within the regiment. I love learning about that stuff. And plus the Germanists, my big chunk of me is German. So, I love learning about those guys and what they're eating and drinking and thinking and everything else. So,
yeah, very good. Well, I think on that note, we'll hear the outro music, not on this recording here, but folks will start hearing the outro music going on. And I'd like to thank you, Andrew, for coming on with us tonight and giving us just a little snapshot into the 9th Ohio.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right, folks, have a great evening.